Okay, determining the attack surface. We need to determine what area of an application is available to users. Just because an application exists, if there's no opportunity for anyone to actually get in, access it, tweak it, then we may or may not need to really worry about mitigating or being proactive in its protection, right? However, that's very unlikely that any application is going to have no exposure. So we need to determine what area of an application is in fact available to users. So what ports do they use? What services, what protocols, what interfaces? All right, so could be ports, it could be multiple ports. You need to understand that or have an understanding of each port that is used. Just because an application is advertised as using one port, it may use 15 others on the back end for calls between different other components, end tier services, middleware, so forth. What services are running, because again, different services have different vulnerabilities that will change over time. What protocols are being used, because the protocols themselves are oftentimes subject to vulnerabilities. And then what interfaces? What are the actual ports on a switch down to the network interfaces of the HBAs to make sure that the driver, the firmware, and so forth are up to date on those components as well. And so our attack surface reduction, or ASR, has the goal of mitigating risk, right? So that's really what we're looking for. We're trying to mitigate risk or exposure in the environment. So we turn off unnecessary functions. Again, if we don't need it, why have it on? Why leave the door open or at least unlocked for someone else to come in and try to mess with our systems? And then we also need to disable unneeded ports, protocols, and so forth. So as I mentioned, if it's not needed, turn it off. Because if we don't monitor things, if we're not using things, we have a tendency to forget about them. And if we forget about them, then what? We don't patch, we don't update, we don't make sure that they're up to snuff. So that just increases our exposure and increases the chance that a hacker can come in without us really knowing it. Or we may need to add additional authentication, maybe a two-factor authentication mechanism, something that makes it more difficult for someone to come in unauthorized.